light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time we give it all.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Lynn Scott Hagerman podcast, where truth has no filter, freedom is our mission, and light exposes the darkness. I am your host, Lynn Scott Hagerman, survivor of child trafficking and medical experimentation underground at a U.S. University Medical Center in conjunction with our government through MK Ultra mind control. I am the voice they tried to silence, and I am silent no more. Praise God. Today, I'm an international award-winning human resource consultant, an independent LifeWave distributor, a marathoner, weightlifter, child of God, follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, and friend to Holy Spirit. Praise God. Be sure to visit my websites, Q, the letter Q, the word grit, GRIT.org, where I am supporting the aftercare of the little ones who've been rescued from above ground and below ground trafficking, as well as helping adults recover from any type of trauma and providing aftercare for all ages. Please visit me too, Live Younger with Lynn, LYNNE.com, where I'm an independent LifeWave distributor, and you can purchase the X39 and Celergize, which together will regenerate your stem cells, reverse age. It's the fountain of youth. It is the wearable med bed. Now let's get to the truth, and I want to share a bit about my guest before I bring him on stage. I am so honored and blessed to welcome John Gizzi. He is the chief political columnist and White House correspondent for Newsmax. He is known as the man who knows everyone in Washington. Praise God. He has decades of insider experience and has received many awards, including the William A. Rusher Award for Journalistic Excellence and CPAC's Journalist of the Year. We're going to dive deep today, folks, into global revelations like the hot mic conversation between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin on organ transplants and immortality, as well as major developments here in the U.S., from Trump's plan to rebrand the Pentagon from the Department of Defense to the Department of War. We're going to talk about the debate over the National Guard, immigration enforcement, and we're going to also talk about vaccine mandates and will they stay or not. Hello, John. Thank you for being here and welcome to my show.
Lynn, it's a pleasure, and thank you for that very moving introduction about the only thing a gentleman can do is die.
John, this is going to be a great conversation. I can tell right now. So I'm going to jump right in. We have all heard the hot mic between, with the world leaders walking down the red carpet. Yeah. And I'd like to know, what was your first reaction to Xi Jinping and Putin, the conversation about being 70 years old is like being a child, and we're going to have, or maybe they are going to have the ability to live 150 years using organ transplants for longevity, and they were even talking immortality. You did an article on that.
Yes, I did. And I spoke to Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey, whose reaction was, this is the kind of conversation Dr. Joseph Mengele would have.
Yes, it is.
Of course, being the diabolical Nazi scientist who experimented on twins and other things that are just too disgusting to even elaborate on. Very simply, you have two strong men, presidents for life, who want to live forever and talked about it. Congressman Smith, senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, has been on the issue of organ harvesting for years. In fact, since 1998, He has either chaired or participated in numerous hearings on that. Organ harvesting is the forceful seizure of 1 to 6 organs from a living individual and then transplanting them. It's a grisly practice, and Congressman Smith has introduced legislation that would not only ban the practice, but would charge $250,000 and up to anyone known to practicing it, and a 20-year prison sentence. Plus, it calls for the collection of information from countries known to violate the laws on organ harvesting, notably China. It passed the House of Representatives in May with only 1 no vote, and now it's gone to the Senate. I can say that Senator Thune, the majority leader, is supportive of it. President Trump has signaled he will sign it into law if it comes to his desk. The one stumbling block, and I'm going to work on this next week, maybe I can be a little more informed, is why Jim Risch of Idaho, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has not scheduled a hearing on this all-important legislation after 4 months. I will say, before I finger point or speculate, that just maybe the surprising and rather scandalous conversation between Xi and Putin just might be what triggers him to have a hearing and, eventually get this measure passed.
So, John, is this legislation only applicable to other nations and not the United States, or is there also pieces in that legislation that ban this in the United States? I think it was 2 weeks ago, RFK Jr. talked about how we needed to be aware that in U.S. hospitals, whenever they would do organ harvesting, people were still alive. And So will this legislation also address that, or is this just for our international relations?
Oh, no, this is worldwide, and it's in the U.S. as well as around the world. It essentially bans and seeks means of discouraging the practice of organ harvesting.
And the congressman who's been working on this for so many years, what is behind his mission to do this? I mean, it's a righteous cause. And why has he not gained traction after all these years? It's such a despicable practice.
Congressman Smith is one of the most forceful and committed human rights advocates of either party in the House of Representatives. I've known him since he was first elected in 1980, and he's now one of the 2 most senior members of the House of Representatives. I saw him and Congressman Hal Rogers of Kentucky elected with Ronald Reagan in 1980. This is his great passion, human rights and the rights of the individual worldwide. He started having hearings on this in 1998 in the House when Republicans had control, and I believe he was a subcommittee chairman on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Since then, he has had numerous hearings on it, and out of it all came the Organ Harvesting Act of 2025. There was an original measure in 2023. It passed the House. This was amended to cover more ground, and it passed the House again with 1 dissenting vote. And this is his passion. If there's an egregious treatment of an individual anywhere in the world, you can count on Congressman Smith to be on top of the issue. I might add that when we talk, it's never a brief conversation because he explains the whole process to me, and usually that he's been in a particular country.
So he has witnessed it firsthand or heard of it through eyewitness testimony.
Yes,
Yes. Yes to both questions.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
And I have to say that the Epoch Times put him on page one. As you mentioned, I did a column on this, and I plan to try to reach the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, James Risch of Idaho, next week, and just ask him, when are you going to bring this up for hearings on the Senate side?
That would be amazing. If you'll text me the response, I would love to know the answer to that question because this is near and dear to my heart. Um, do you know, or have you heard, have any of the world leaders already been participating themselves, reap the benefits of organ harvesting?
Not that I know of. That is something that's private, and one would not wish to discuss this. You don't discuss your medical history. I don't. World leaders don't. And particularly when they come from a totalitarian country, information about the leaders is usually very, very filtered and private. So I certainly don't know if they have. Over the years, many prominent people have tried to extend their lives through unusual means. In the 1950s, there was always discussion of the transplanting of the glands of a monkey into a human being, and that would extend his or her life. And many prominent people at the time were rumored to have had the monkey gland operation. I don't know if any of them were ever proven. I know some people in the United States who had it. But this kind of information we won't find out until after they're dead and a former secretary or assistant writes a book on it.
I have had people on my show before who have also been in China, and they have interviewed the prison guards, the prison wardens, where the live organ harvesting is performed on those poor religious organizations in China, and it is an absolutely horrific process.
I imagine that it is, because you're talking about taking the organs, a kidney or a lung from a living person. I can't imagine what that would be like. And I have no idea about anyone who's actually received the organs of another person. But I have to say that this is once again the case of an individual having absolute power who thinks he can do anything to his subjects, his subordinates. And usually their stories do not have happy endings. And if you look at the end of totalitarians in the world, it rarely is very happy. From Hitler to Mao Zedong, they all died very sadly. Ceausescu of Romania, executed by his own people. Mussolini. In the words of Shelley, here lies your tyrant who sought to rule the world, immortal.
Excellent quote. And one final question on this topic before we go to the next one. RFK Jr.'s comment about how in the United States at the U.S. hospitals, organs are harvested live from U.S. citizens during the organ harvesting process. That shocked America. And he also shared that there's no anesthesia used because that would harm the organs. What do you think is going to happen in this arena? Do you think that that's going to be part of what's tied in with the legislation, and we might get some resolution with that too?
I think so. And again, that's why the Senate hearings are so important. The effects of this and what it does to individuals certainly came out in the hearings at which Congressman Smith was a participant or a chairman. I would say that there'll be even more when Senate hearings come up. And I think the more people know about this, Lynn, the greater the chances are of its enactment and having a total ban on the practice.
Amen. That is my prayer. So I want to go to the Department of War.
Sure.
President Trump is planning to rebrand the Department of Defense to the Department of War. And from your perspective, what is the significance of what he's doing? What is he up to?
Well, to be honest, it's not an issue I've given a lot of thought to over the years. Pete Hegseth, before he became Secretary of Defense, mentioned in his book that it would certainly send shock and deterrence to other countries to know that we have a department and that its primary purpose is to make war when provoked. In other words, when you're talking about war and not about defending yourself, you mean business, or so Secretary Hegseth felt when he wrote his book. Now, there is a long history. When George Washington created the first cabinet departments upon becoming president, he created a Department of War with the intention that it would protect the shores and repel a future attack. To underscore his message, he called it the Department of War and appointed his right-hand man in the Continental Army, General Henry Knox, as America's first Secretary of War. And over the years, the Department of War oversaw victories in the United States. Edwin Stanton, a super lawyer of his time, was asked by Abraham Lincoln to be Secretary of War when the country had split apart. And he fortunately was able to mobilize and motivate American forces, and they saved the Republic. In World War I, Newton D. Baker, former mayor of Cleveland, Ohio, master politician, got the U.S. ready for the First World War, which was won in short order. William Howard Taft worked aside Teddy Roosevelt as his Secretary of War and became president. When World War II broke out, Franklin Roosevelt asked Henry Stimson, a Republican, one-time Secretary of State under Herbert Hoover, to come out of retirement and to mobilize America once again for the greatest conflict it would be in. Overall, as President Trump pointed out at the White House, when we had the Department of War, we never lost a war. Now, 1947, under the National Security Act, Army, formerly under the Department of War, the Department of the Navy, which was a cabinet level office, department on the same level as the Department of War, were combined. And the Air Force had its own department created for the first time. And that became the combined American Defense Force. And then 2 years later, under an amendment, the name was changed from the Department of War to the Department of Defense. And as you certainly know, over the years, the Coast Guard has been added, most recently the U.S. Space Force, and the Department of Defense is the largest such department in the federal government. I know that there is disagreement about changing the name. Most Republican House members and senators support changing it back to the Department of War. I mentioned Congressman Smith earlier, and he said his brother was a Navy pilot. he's been on battleships and seen takeoffs of plane and watched the fighting men and women do humanitarian deeds like feed people and provide rescue missions for victims of hurricanes or floods or an earthquake. So he said the department does more than make war. On the other hand, I heard Newt Gingrich once say the primary purpose of the military is to kill the enemy and wage war. So one could go either way on that. I will say, from lawmakers I've talked to, not to mention President Trump's own base, that this is a popular move. My colleague James Rosen points out it'll probably cost $3 to $7 million to change the name on all of the signs at the Pentagon, as well as print new stationery and to send out forms that say Department of War rather than Defense. On the other hand, this always involves cost when you change the name, say, of a base or a memorial. And if you didn't do that, you'd never change the name of anything. Now, one postscript to this is that I am always uncomfortable with doing something by executive order, which President Trump did today, when it's been enacted by an act of Congress. And before the year is out, Congress has to pass the Defense Appropriations Act. And I would assume that this name change will be there. In other words, the order that the president signed today is just the beginning, a tease, so to speak. The legislation that he will hopefully sign by the end of the year will make it official. It'll be the Department of War.
I have been watching social media feed all day regarding this topic, and I agree with you. We, the people across the United States, are very much overall for the change to the Department of War. Right. And I have been reading some interesting comments as to why from we, the people. And the number one seems to be that the U.S. citizens overall, with the wars that we've had, have not been wars to defend our nation, but more wars to have wars for the military, to the military defense contractors to make money. And so the calling it the Department of Defense is a misnomer, because they are a Department of War creating wars. That's what I've been reading all over social media. So that seems to be popular to rebrand it to what they actually do. Just as a side note. So on the National Guard, let's switch to that. It's very similar, just in terms of our military. President Trump sending the National Guard to D.C. Tell me about your thoughts on that.
Well, I live in the District of Columbia, and using the subway system, I have seen armed troops walking there, and it does create a feeling of safety. There is no doubt about that. And in addition, we have a major homeless problem in the district. The president has said that the homeless will be not allowed to sleep out on the streets and be moved either to an institution, a hospital, or something like that. Now, when I was a kid, I hated people who said when I was a kid. Now I say it all the time. When I was growing up in Hartford, Connecticut, I never saw homeless people. Yeah. I would read the New York newspapers that my parents brought home, and occasionally read about how what was called then vagrants were arrested and often sent to mental institutions. So it was in Connecticut. There was a major institution in Danbury, Connecticut, and that's where those who were homeless, or someone who did not have $20 in their wallet, could be arrested and sent to. I always went outdoors and had money with me. And in 1976, the Supreme Court essentially ruled that forced institutionalization was unconstitutional, and they reopened the hospitals and the homes for the mentally disturbed. No one could be forcefully incarcerated. And that's my first experience seeing people lie on the streets. President Trump is clearly setting the stage to have this tested again in the Supreme Court.
So, did I hear you correctly, John, say that the mental health facilities opened their doors and had everyone just walk out?
They had to. You were deinstitutionalized at the time, and it was a 1976 ruling by the Supreme Court. And I submit to you, that's when people began to see for the first time people lying on the streets. I'm on the Friends of the Library board in my neighborhood. And one of the things that the librarians explain is that those who do not have a home can come in and eat there as well, and they can't be ejected from the library.
So I'm still stuck on mental institutions being forced to open their doors and let people on the street who needed help. So I'll have to wrap my mind around that after we talk. So I'm glad to hear, I've been hearing that from a lot of citizens in DC, that they do feel safer with the guard there. They do feel safer with the military presence. Do you see this, or have you been hearing, is this going to be a long term? I heard the mayor, I believe it was today, say that she was welcoming them permanently into DC.
It all depends on the city. Now, as you also know, Lynn, Chicago and its mayor and the governor of Illinois, Governor Pritzker, are very much opposed to troops coming in. Now, this is a city with a high crime rate.
Right.
This is one that is essentially looking the proverbial gift horse in the mouth on this. And my guess is that there will be other cases, as there was in Los Angeles, where the crime rate is such a threat to people that the federal government will send them in, regardless of what local officials say. My own thought on that is mixed. On the one hand, it's good to see crime down, and the District of Columbia, which is created by the Constitution and not an independent city of any kind. It's essentially still a ward of the federal government, albeit one that can elect its own leaders here. But the federal government has the final say. I'm sure there will be challenges to this approach in other major cities, and we'll see it. It all depends on the city and on the political leaders there in the end.
Whenever I look at this, I think from just a regular, everyday US citizen standpoint, and to have to try to function and survive with these high levels of crimes is not what the United States of America is. And to be afraid to go outside your door, to walk down the street, to go out at night, that's not what we, the people, think that America is either. So to me, it defies. I'm in Missouri, so there's a lot of show me state logic, common sense going on in this part of the nation, and to me it defies logic that there would be leaders in a city that would be all right with high crime rates. I can't even begin to wrap my mind around that.
In 1968 in Kansas City, there was rioting along racial lines, as there was in the rest of the country. And the then police chief of Kansas City, Clarence Kelly, was able to deal with it without any intervention from anyone else. He went on, of course, to be director of the FBI under President Gerald Ford. Is it not every city is the same. And in some, the crime and the problem of homelessness have exceeded the bounds of local control. Another thing, cities don't have the money and resources that they did in the 1960s or 70s. The federal government is not there to bail them out anymore because we've got a federal deficit, worse problems. So in the end, it's the question, somebody has to do it. Hence the case for sending in troops or federalizing National Guard to go in and do the job.
Do you see this happening, John? It looks like from everything I'm seeing from the clips from DC, from the various sources, and watching social media, that this is very likely imminent in the 19 states that President Trump has mentioned. What's your thoughts?
Now, my thoughts are that I would like to take a deep look, a deep dive, as people say, into the politics of the states and the cities. He's getting a very frosty reception from the windy city of Chicago and the prairie state of Illinois. That might be a little different in, say, Texas or its major cities. And it's all going to be on a case-by-case or state-by-state basis.
Do you have, and I'm sure you do, what are your thoughts about why, for example, Chicago is pushing back so desperately when their crime is ridiculously out of control and has been for a long time? Clearly, the local and state authorities are not able to handle it, or they would have by now.
They would have by now. I could give you several reasons, Lynn, for it. Part of which is many cities are cash strapped right now. And I see right here in the district, being on the board of our library group, that we have to make do with less in the library system. And that was one of the first areas that was cut. I'm sorry to say that in other places, law enforcement has been cut in terms of funding and what the cities have in terms of taxes. It's a function of the times that we were in right now. Cities spent frivolously on things when they were getting federal aid coming in years ago. Now they don't have it, but the programs still exist. And I think each of the major cities, including St. Louis or Kansas City, are going to have to take a deep look at their budgets and what they're spending. There's an old saying, everyone wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die to get there. And
I haven't heard that, but that's good.
we're going to have to take a very good look at all of the programs in cities that are there and just see what they can do with and do without. 2 years ago, I went to Argentina and watched the inauguration of President Javier Milei, the first libertarian ever to become a chief of state anywhere in the world. And on his first day in office, he promptly let go 9,000 government employees, and he reduced the number of cabinet ministries from 18 to 11.
Wow. Way to go.
And it hurt. There was rioting. They had to use hoses to keep down people who'd lost their jobs and members of their family. But I interviewed two sisters. One was an orthodontist, and the other was an optometrist. Young people with a particular worldview. And they said, things have got to get better, but they've got to get worse first. And that's what's happening in Argentina, and they understand it. Milei will have been in power 2 years this December, and he's making the hard decisions, and so far the people seem to support him.
So I'm going to read this next question because it has to do with the judicial system, so I want to make sure I ask it properly. So a U.S. appeals court just blocked limits on Trump's use of troops in Los Angeles. How does this expand his presidential authority, or does it?
Well, We have an appellate system in the United States, and I would just say, not knowing the nuances of this, Lynn, it will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And again, you could have a landmark decision on just what a president can or can't do in terms of deploying troops in the domestic United States. So I would say, as I do on many other things, let's see what the court does.
Okay. And before we leave this topic, and I just have to say, John, your historical knowledge and your thoughts and recommendations, opinions on these topics, I find them phenomenal and insightful. And I'm just so grateful to have you on today because you're shedding light on topics that can be very murky for we the people. So God bless you. And before I finish this topic, do you have any other, you're welcome. Do you have any other thoughts on this particular topic before we go to immigration and enforcement?
If we reach a point where cities are living within their means and they give support to the police, we won't have to have this kind of discussion, Lynn, and presidents will not have to send troops in. But this is a case of being between the proverbial rock and a hard place. When you cut the budgets of cities, do you cut the budgets for police departments? And do you reduce the number of police and increase the area in which they patrol? I don't know what the answer is on this, but I'm going to say the final answer will come from the cities themselves and the people who are their mayors and other city fathers and mothers.
You know, and that leads me to one more question. Judge Janine, which I know she's now the U.S. Attorney for D.C.
Yeah.
But, you know, we all love her as Judge Janine Pirro. She is conducting and issuing subpoenas for the Metropolitan Police Department in D.C., doing an investigation. Do you have knowledge about what's happening there?
I don't, and I will tell you, the U.S. Attorney's Office keeps things very close to its vest right now in terms of information. It's one of the largest of the U.S. Attorney's offices here, and I do not have information on this. Neil McCabe, who had been the spokesman for Ed Martin, whom I thought was going to be U.S. Attorney, always said he would set up an interview and I could ask Mr. Martin himself. Mr. Martin was not confirmed and he was moved over to be the U.S. Pardon Attorney. Still interesting, but that doesn't give you an answer to your question. So I would say I should probably redouble my efforts to interview Judge Janine.
It would be fascinating. If you're able to secure that interview, I would love to I watch Newsmax and follow that, but I would love to know when she would be on because I think that would be fascinating. And just hearing through different people, I had a source, a retired general, who said that there are military prosecutors now in DC also. And I found that fascinating. I'm not sure if you've heard about that.
No, I haven't heard about it. And one thing you'll find about me, Lynn, is that if I don't know a topic, I'm certainly not going to bluff you or your audience out there. Sometimes people respect you more when you simply say 3 words, I don't know.
And I love that because what you do know, I mean, you amaze me, John, your knowledge of history, your ability to remember all of these names. I'm so grateful to have you on today. So immigration and enforcement, Alligator Alcatraz. There was some scuttlebutt that they tried, I guess, to close the facility, and then the appeals court said proceed. So what is happening there?
Well, once again, the administration is committed to keeping Alligator Alcatraz opened. The president visited there with Florida Governor DeSantis and expressed his support. He's repeated that several times since then. Once again, and I hate to repeat myself, but it will go to the Supreme Court, like a lot of other things that you brought up, and that will have the final say. And this is why it's so important who's appointing the jurists to the Supreme Court and to the lower courts as well.
With Alligator Alcatraz, what do at the federal level, what do the senators and congressmen think about that? What have you been hearing?
Actually, it's not been a top topic of attention now. Certainly, the appropriations process, not to mention U.S. relations and its involvement with trying to solve the Russo-Ukraine war, are the topics most lawmakers talk about. But I would say clearly on the Republican side, the maintenance of Alligator Alcatraz is important, and you'll find most members are supportive of it. The president's visit underscored the priority he places on the institution. And as I said, many who find that those who are in the country illegally are going there become very supportive over that.
Yes, yes. So this next question too, I want to read it because I want to make sure I say the name of our agency correct. The United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, they're adding armed agents. So tell me about your thoughts there.
Certainly the president's point man on the illegal immigration, Tom Homan, worked tirelessly to achieve the funding, which will come in the appropriations process, the funding for ICE agents, more people to enforce the borders, the border patrol. In other words, in that particular part of Homeland Security, securing the borders, the U.S. will have the most money invested in history at this point. It's already started in a good way. The Secretary of Homeland Security said last week that it's now been several months where there is zero entrance of people coming in the U.S. And many with cash incentive are self-deporting to go back. Now, again, when you talk about 11 million, and I'm sorry, folks, I do have some people who say I'm just parroting or repeating a government figure, and the number is probably larger. I don't know, but once you reach 11 million, that's a lot of people who are here illegally, many of whom have assimilated. One fellow had 3 sons in the Marine Corps already. So it's going to be downright impossible to find everyone who came into the U.S. illegally. But those who've come in recently, they're already in the process of self-deporting on their own. And the arrests and institutions like Alligator Alcatraz have discouraged people from trying to enter the U.S. illegally. Now, is this a long-term solution? No. America's always welcomed people as long as they obey the rules. And what is going to have to happen, I believe, is that there's got to be a complete streamlining and overhaul of the Immigration and Naturalization Service to where someone needs a visa, work permit, any of those things, they can get them without languishing for 6 months and thereby finding just simply making a run for it into the U.S. with no legal permission more attractive. Something's got to be done because there will always be people who want to come legally and become U.S. citizens eventually. I say let them. We've always reached out to those people. I'm the grandson of immigrants who came over on Ellis Island in New York. And the idea is don't make it so difficult so as they go the route of law breaking.
So that people can come in the right way, because
Right.
I know we do have laws and we are a nation of laws. And the laws, I'm sure, need to be streamlined as they do in every field. When
Right.
you talk about the self-deporting, what so there is a financial incentive given to illegal aliens to self-deport?
Oh, yeah, they give them a cash benefit. If they'll come forward and leave the country, I think they'll get the figures $5,000 that I've heard to go back.
Have you heard how many are taking advantage of this?
The Department of Homeland Security said that 1 million so far have self-deported since January. I'd like to see the actual figures and where this is happening and the basis of it. But that's the party line, so to speak, the official line.
You know, we didn't talk about you sharing about this before we came on the show, but I'm confident you have information on this. You mentioned Tom Homan.
Yeah.
Every time I think of Tom Homan, because of my background, I think of the poor little ones that were trafficked across the border during the Biden administration. The official statistic, 330,000. I've talked to J.J. Carroll, who's a retired high-ranking Border Security Patrol commander, who said in his thorough investigation and documentary, he sees the number more at 900,000. Nonetheless, a lot of little ones. And Tom Homan, I know, has been, and President Trump, aggressively trying to find the children. And do you have some knowledge about what is happening there and how that's going?
Lynn, I got to let you down on this. They play very close to their vest on certain things in Tom Homan's office. He's come on Newsmax television. I see him at the White House talking to reporters. He's very accessible, frankly. But on this particular topic, I think you're going to just have to wait till they have something to report.
And I know that, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, both President Trump and Tom Homan were talking about 13,000 children that have been found. So it seems like a slow but sure process. But I do know from being involved in helping in that area, so much does have to be done extremely confidentially for the protection of the little ones. So that's understandable. Exactly. So let's flip to Florida. And Dr. Latipo, the Surgeon General. So I had the privilege of having his wife on my Rumble channel, the Lynn Scott Hagerman Show, probably 3 months ago. And she's just a beautiful, beautiful woman, beautiful soul. And he is too. I have not met him, but from my interview and talking with her, I know he is. And just watching what he's done, I mean, he was a phenomenal warrior and hero during COVID. And everything going on then. He gave a very passionate presentation this week regarding the fact that no human being should be able to tell any of us what to inject in our bodies. And now the state of Florida is banning all vaccines that are required vaccines for the children. And Dr. Oz, I was reading on social media today that he is very supportive of their efforts to eliminate the childhood vaccine mandates. How is all this being received in Washington?
Well, once again, you have to realize that there is a medical lobby, and the same people who stood by the ousted head of the Center for Disease Control just last week
Yes.
are the same kind who would take the opposite viewpoint from what you described. And they are true influencers. They're people who just have that capital D, small r period before their name. And right away, the mainstream media goes to them as a reliable source. So anything you described is going to have blowback from the medical community. And I would just simply say, watch when that happens.
So the medical lobby, when you mentioned the gentleman at CDC that was recently terminated, there, pardon me?
Lady.
I'm sorry, yes.
Perez.
Yeah, I meant lady. There's been a lot of social media coverage on that too, but the medical lobby, it is strong to I want to say to a ridiculous level, but it's so serious that it's very frustrating for regular Americans as to why a medical lobby has so much power over our health care.
Up until the enactment of Medicare, the medical lobby, particularly the American Medical Association, was seen as being a force against a government hand in medicine. It was always thought of this as a private area. They fought vigorously attempts to create national health insurance and Medicare at the beginning, and because they felt it would lead to state control of medicine. Well, it hasn't done that. Quite frankly, a lot of people in that same community now find that under the status quo, they tend to do very well on things. And I could describe all of the different ways. Let's say they haven't suffered under the Medicare that they so feared, nor have they suffered under Medicare Part D, whose enactment I covered in 2003. Nor does Medicaid hurt them that much. Hurts a lot of other people, though, because many people who receive it are not the indigents, the poor, that the program was originally designed for. Both of those entitlements need a complete overhaul. But to go back directly to your question before I editorialize, I would simply say that the same people who warned against socialized medicine and state healthcare systems are the same way people who now find that they profit from it, and hence they will support those who support them in government. A disruptor, such as Robert Kennedy Jr., need not apply.
I was reading on social media an alarming statistic that with physicians and the vaccines, that they're incentivized to vaccinate all their patients with whatever vaccines are available. And if they receive a certain percentage vaccination rate of their patient population, they get major bonuses up to $1 million. And that to me does not sound like the do no harm that we all thought people with the DR in front of them in the white coats would do. But of course, we all went through COVID and started learning information also. I know just from social media, the regular everyday American is applauding Dr. Ladapo and Governor DeSantis for the steps that they're taking, because we're all, and I've been watching RFK Jr. testify in Congress this week, and we are learning some amazing facts and statistics from him about what has been happening to the nation and our children, especially. My ears were really attentive to the harm that's being done to the little ones.
Mm-hmm. I think this is it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a lightning rod. He was barely confirmed, had Republicans won 2 less Senate seats and had a simple majority, he would not have made it, frankly. And he is always going to be under fire completely. He handled himself quite well in those hearings with a decidedly hostile audience, notably Elizabeth Warren, and I could name a few others, but I'm sure that many saw them on television. Just remember, like Pete Hegseth and some other cabinet members, Robert Kennedy is a disruptor. He's there to take on the status quo. Status quo, that's Latin for the mess we're in. And by the way, in keeping with my policy of never plagiarizing and attributing quotes to people, that came from Ronald Reagan, actually. So
Okay. Well, that's a good one.
Where it's due. And hence he becomes a target all the time. Now, am I a Kennedy acolyte? Hardly. I think some of the things he said about vaccines and his criticisms of some of the policies during COVID of the government were unjustified. They certainly are subject to scrutiny at this point. But that said, he wrote a book all about why Dr. Fauci was bad. And he brought out many things that we now know are fact about the mishandling of COVID by government. But I also say there's a lot of blame to go around in both sides.
So we have about 4 or 5 minutes left, John. What would you share? We talked about a lot of things today. What would you like to leave the audience with? Or is there another topic that we should chat about briefly that you believe people should be aware of that's a current event?
I'd have to say that we live in a world where we have a lot of enemies out there. It is not a perfect world. When the Cold War ended and the old Soviet Union collapsed, James Woolsey, who was President Clinton's CIA director, said, "We've slain the dragon, but there's many snakes out in the woods." And that is the case. There are numerous countries, call them an axis of evil, call them gangster regimes, but their common denominator is a hatred of all things American. And they're emboldened by division and rancor in this country and encouraged by our failure to do something to thwart their efforts. And that is a fact that's out there. Is the war in Ukraine necessary? Probably not. Does the U.S. have a part in ending it? Yes, so long as U.S. troops aren't committed. If one can get people to a peace table and move on, that's a good thing. One thing about President Trump, he is someone who hates the thought of Americans dying in a foreign country somewhere. And I think he's going to be very careful about the commitments he makes and just where he would deploy U.S. troops. That's something to be positive about. But he's also someone who sees wrong going on, be it disputes between India and Pakistan or between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and he offers a solution. It's a little different from past presidents. How many presidents do you know spoke of negotiation, but never used the word deal? He uses it all the time now. And it's a different approach, but it works in some places. My message is simply this. We live in a world that is smaller than it was when I was growing up. Places that seem far away that I'd never visit, you can visit them online and know all about them if you choose to enmesh the information with yourself. And I think this is something important because it's a very unfriendly world out there. And with a lot of people that don't like the U.S. that we know, and some that may come up in the end that we don't know. And that's something all Americans should be wary of.
So we're going to take a 1-minute break and be back for some final comments. So hold on, folks.
A life empowered is closer than you think. We're all looking for a better way. reimagine what's next with a new sense of exuberance. Why not power on like you mean it? Or power off blissfully? A better sleep is a better awake. You've never moved like this before. With the energy nature intended. Imagine reprogramming the way you look at the speed of science, at longevity, at exhilaration. It's next level rejuvenation. Take control of your well-being from the inside out and outside in. The light within is ready to ignite. Be the light. LifeWave.
Please go to liveyoungerwithlynn.com, order your X39 and Celergize, where your stem cells will be regenerated. It is the fountain of youth. It is the wearable med bed. Welcome back, everybody. John, you're doing amazing work for humanity. You're doing amazing work getting the news out, keeping us educated. And I know you're currently with Newsmax, but tell people how they can follow you, how they can read your articles, which are amazing. I've been reading them. Tell people how they can reach you, follow you, find you.
Well, very simply, go to Newsmax's website, newsmax.com, and you'll see my articles. If you Google John Gizzi on politics, you get to see me exclusively on it. And if you really want to follow me, go to X and at John Gizzi.
Well, very good. I encourage everyone to do that. Thank you, John. Godspeed. And until next time, this is the Lynn Scott Hagerman podcast, where truth is rising, and so are we.
Light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call.